So James Melia just asked in the comments down below, is there a difference between training upper body as opposed to training lower body as far as rep ranges go? Okay, do I need to do higher reps for upper body or lower reps for upper body? How does this work? So in my experience, I've noticed that you need to do a combination of high reps and low reps with everything. Okay, that's just what works. But that said, whenever the spine is involved in a movement, there is a higher risk of injury, and you also have to classify failure as different than when, say, you're doing bicep curls. If I hit failure in bicep curls, there's no real risk of injury. Not really. I mean, there can be an injury, of course, but there's not really a risk. Whereas when my spine hits failure, if those little muscles that support the spine and keep it in the proper position start to fail, and all of a sudden they do this, then I risk either ligament damage or disc damage, okay? So this is another factor to take into account when you're training legs or training back. So when you're doing squats or heavy lunges or all this kind of thing, there are a lot more joints involved and a lot more muscles that are responsible for stabilizing the areas to prevent injury. If those muscles fail, then you have an injury. So that said, that's why I tend to train in higher rep ranges with legs most of the time, not all the time. It's not that I never do a 6 or 7 rep set, but I am aware that doing 5 reps on a squat is much more risky than 5 reps on the bench. This is why guys that do 5 reps on the squat, they're wearing a belt or they're doing knee wraps and all this kind of stuff, because they're trying to help stabilize those joints to minimize the risk of injury. So me, I don't use knee wraps, I don't use a belt. So because of this, I also stay with a little bit higher rep range in most cases. You know, I usually don't go below 7 or 8 reps too often on squat. You barely ever see it because I have tweaked my back before. I have done these types of things to myself. This is how I learned, okay? So basically I listen to the body and respond accordingly. And what I've noticed is that if you push the body, you have to make sure you push it enough, but not so much that it breaks. Ultimately, when you're learning at first, sometimes you push, and then all of a sudden, boom, you snap something, then you're like, okay, I pushed too hard. Now back off on the pushing. From that principle, I've noticed that legs also seem to respond very well to medium to high reps, and then once in a while you throw in some heavy sets to increase the strength. Okay, so it's not like you don't challenge yourself, but you have to challenge yourself safely. So I hope that helps explain why I sometimes change the rep ranges around and why I'm a little bit more reckless with heavy weights, say with shoulder press as opposed to squats or lunges. The more stability that's involved, the more careful you have to become and the more aware you have to become, okay? You have to realize that failure means that when you break form, that's when the set is done. I know a guy that started to do deadlifts and he had a great physique and he was doing heavy dumbbell curls and bench presses and all this kind of stuff, but then he started doing deadlifts as a part of his routine and he would apply the same principles. He would go into failure and just strain as hard as he can, just strain right through the movements, and of course he would break form here and there, and then one day, ka-ting, you know, just snapped. His lower back just snapped and he was like hobbling around for a couple months. This is what happens. You have to make sure that you take into account what you are doing and what the risk factors are involved in the joints that you are training. Lower back is a different level of risk and a different level of responsibility and impeccability to form than, say, training biceps or bench press. So as long as you take those factors into account, you should be fine. And like I said, it just depends on the individual as well. Some people, it doesn't matter. I mean, they feel totally stable when they're doing their squats or their deadlifts, and no problem. As long as you're able to maintain form, then you can do the same rep ranges. But I also noticed that when you're training legs, you will be putting a lot more stress on your overall system from heavy weight because you're using all these different joints and there's so much more stability involved. So you don't necessarily have to go as heavy as often because of the amount of stress involved from going heavy on those movements. That might be another reason why I tend to lighten the loads a little bit on legs a little bit more often than, say, with upper body training. So I hope this helps, and if you need to get a hold of me, just go to naturalgallantbodybuilding.com and I'll talk to you soon.